welcome back.
Yes, thank you.
You were a student at MacEwan University, and so this is not unusual stomping ground for you.
Absolutely, yeah. I was last here in 2010.
Okay, and you were taking courses then in your?
Yeah, at that point I had started into an education degree.
Yeah, okay. And so your background is very eclectic in a lot of ways. You have some music, and you were involved with, the sing. What was your musical background?
Well, I grew up playing piano, sort of taking piano lessons. Learned how to play by ear when I was about 14 years old, and then it sort of took off for me, started writing songs, kind of getting into it. So I actually attended the music program at MacEwan from 93 to 95,
right?
Studying piano performance.
Okay.
Came back to MacEwan in 2000 and did a second major in live sound and recording.
Okay.
So spent about a dozen years in total, sort of kicking around the Edmonton music scene.
Yeah.
Played with a few different bands, did some solo work, worked as a studio engineer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the studio engineering, do we have what's the infrastructure here? Are there a lot of businesses that I think of Stony Plain Records that is out of Edmonton? Are there other kind of more independent labels that call Edmonton
yeah,
home,
there's a few independent record labels around, certainly a lot of recording studios. So I think in part because of the program at MacEwan, we generate a lot of very talented musicians at Edmonton and a number of very talented studio engineers who've set up different businesses. So Edmonton, which is just over on 109th Street, a gentleman named Doug Organ, who graduated from MacEwan, I think back in the early 2000s. He runs that studio there. Certainly the audio department, run by Terry Tran. Yeah, lots of sort of varying levels of studios around Edmonton.
So what do you think? What is it about Edmonton that really has that kind of a cultural and arts community? What fosters that?
Well, I think if you've heard of the Make Something Edmonton campaign, I think that's really what's at the core of it. People in Edmonton are creators. They're innovators. They have ideas, and they're willing to work hard to make them happen. And I think that's true whether you're in business or whether you're in the arts. So you see a lot of small businesses start up, and really operating as a musician, whether you have a band or a studio or whatever it may be, that in reality is operating a small business.
Right.
Right? So it's people that are willing to innovate, willing to put their creativity. They have an idea, they want to make it happen, they get out and they work to make it.
That's one of the things I think MacEwan itself has an arts and cultural management program that can talk to people that might have the background in terms of the performing ability, but they don't really know exactly how to take that out and to ensure that they're able to make a living at it. So that's
Absolutely, it's a fantastic program. I know many people that are very active in the music scene who've gone through it. I think it's a great thing to have because, of course, not all musicians are great business people. Some people have great creativity in some areas, but not in others. So it's helpful to have folks who have the business acumen, but still have a strong understanding of the arts who can come alongside and sort of work with creative and artistic people and help support their careers.
And it's so important what you've just said in many different fields, whether it be the arts or trades or whatever. You're good at doing a certain thing, and you get to be a little bit successful at it in the business world. But the background, your primary background is with respect to that, ability versus the business side. So, it is something to think about is how do I grow that next step, and do I do that? Do I go back for education, or do I hire somebody? And having that realization, there's a lot of opportunities for students to say, there might be some untapped areas like arts and cultural management where they can see the vibrant Edmonton kind of community for many arts and say, maybe this is where I want to be in the future.
Absolutely, and I think in a lot of ways, if you start out by pursuing something that has a strong interest for you, something that you're really passionate about, by exploring that, you can discover a lot of other skills you might not realize you had. Like a lot of people might not think that being a musician would be something that would prepare you for a career in politics. But I learned a lot about my skill set from working as a musician. Both from learning how to perform, learning how to be on stage, learning how to work a crowd, learning how to be in front of people and be able to hold an audience. Those are really important skills for me now.
Right.
Learning how to organize and promote a show. You know, learning how to be able to pull people together to rehearse as a band, come up with a plan, sort of what are we going to do, how are we going to build this, which direction are we going to go. So all those sorts of organizational and communication skills have come in very useful for me.
And that's something that I think you did some work as well on communications at Railroad?
Absolutely. So I decided in 2009 that I was going to go back to school. I'd come down with a digestive illness in around 2006. It sort of knocked me out for about a year. Came back and sort of spent a little bit of time freelancing as a studio engineer, and eventually decided that I needed more stability, decided to go back to school. So I originally started out in education because I had spent some time working at Long and McQuaid Musical Instruments, just over on 107th and 102nd there. And that's where I discovered a new skill that I had. I realized I was very good at explaining things to people. So I thought, well, maybe education, being a teacher, would be a good fit for me. So I did a semester here at MacEwan, 2 semesters at the U of A. And then, again, my illness was sort of flaring up. I wasn't ready to do my practicum semester and was sort of debating whether to go ahead. And then I learned a bit more about the field of communications and sort of realized, well, my skill set might fit there well. I write well, I speak well, I enjoy working with people, organizing and getting information out. So I decided to pursue communications and did 2 more years through Royal Roads University in Victoria online.
Right now we're seeing a lot of from our American neighbors. I don't know if you're following the, the primaries and their election process. The ability to communicate and get your points across is so important, and to get through that noise. I mean, there's so many things that people are dealing with today that how do you ensure that your message gets across in the way you want to? And that can affect, you know, from a business standpoint, political standpoint. So how do you find the best way, what's the best way or the best strategy to ensure that people understand, you know, what you're looking at in terms of getting your message across?
I think there's a few things there. You know, in terms of trying to reach a mass audience with any idea or any message, definitely simplicity is a key. So you first of all, before you can effectively communicate a message, you have to know what your message is. So I think spending the time to really boil down what is it that you want to say, what is the most important part of it, really clearing out anything that's extra and sort of extraneous and getting down to your core message. And then keeping it simple, focused, and in politics and in any other field, I think really what it comes down to is repetition.
Repetition.
Right?
Yeah.
It takes, I've read a lot of studies, can't remember the exact ones, but it takes a lot of times before an idea sticks in people's heads. So that's why you're going to hear politicians a lot of times, you'll hear them saying the same things. You'll hear, you know, a whole group of politicians for a particular party, and they'll keep saying the same thing in the same way over and over again, because it takes time for that to sort of feed into the public mind, for it to settle in. The other thing I think is creativity. Finding a unique way to say what it is you want to say, particularly in terms of metaphor or analogy. I think, you know, people connect to stories is one thing that I've really found, right? People connect to stories, to narratives. So if you can tie your idea to a story, even to a person and their story, that's going to have a lot more strength, and it's going to stick in people's minds a lot more as well.
It's one of the things that, you know, I think if you can make it something that they can relate to on an individual level, that makes more sense to them. You know, when we talk about poverty, if you tell, you know, people that there are 1 billion people that live below a certain income level, that don't have access to clean water, that becomes such a large issue. But if you can point to an individual with their story, then people can actually see that, they can look at and see that person that's affected by it, and that comes across much more strongly.
Absolutely, and I think that's another key part of communication is really knowing your audience. So what is it that the people you're talking to are concerned about? What is it they want to know? What is it they want for themselves? And finding a way to tie your message into that is going to make it much more personable and much more likely that they're going to hear.
Yeah. So now you were coming up to a period of time. You've been in your office for maybe 10 or 11 months. Have you changed how you communicate, or have you found any challenges to communication with the communities that you're engaged with?
Yes and no. I mean, largely off the start. You know, my first goal when I came into office was basically to try to get out in the community as much as possible. So for the first 6 months, the objective was just to try to attend as many of the events in the community as I possibly could, whether I was invited or not. We sat down with my constituency assistant. We made a list of everything that was happening in Edmonton-Centre, and we made sure I was there and had an opportunity to speak. We took lots of pictures and then made sure everything went out on social media.
Right.
So, you know, on Twitter, on Facebook, made very clear that I was out in the community. So that was really helpful in a lot of respects. First of all, it allowed me to make a lot of personal connections. So, you know, communication, you know, there's mass communication, but then there's actually genuinely sitting down and talking to people individually. And I think you have to do both for both to work. You know, the mass communication will come across as inauthentic if you don't have real experience, you haven't spent time on the ground with people. So that was a great opportunity. It really helped me get a really good sense of exactly what was happening on the ground in Edmonton-Centre, what people were doing on the front lines, and what the needs and issues were.
Okay.
And then now, that sort of really helped inform me then, so now my communications now, I feel like I can speak truthfully and honestly and actually to the actual issues and the actual problems of what's going on. And if people ask me questions, well, what about the issue of homelessness? I can say, well, yeah, you know, I've met with Boyle Street Community Services, I've talked with these folks, this is what I'm hearing, these are what the concerns are, you know, and here's some things I think we can do to try to take it forward. So the biggest challenge now for me now is that I think you can always reach a certain number of people who are fairly active and engaged. So there's people that read social media, they read the newspaper, they pay attention to what's going on around them. The challenge then is trying to reach the people who aren't in that segment, right? So there's a lot of people who are just very busy and occupied with their day-to-day lives and aren't paying close attention to those means, so then trying to find ways to reach out and communicate with them.
So do you find that, you know, on social media, you've got followers, and do you get a lot of good feedback in terms of, or positive feedback, or do you find that a lot of it is negative? How do you deal with both of them?
Right. Well, for the most part, most of the feedback I've gotten through social media has been quite positive. Certainly when I talk to people in person, you know, I have people that say, you know, I enjoy following your Twitter feed. I like seeing the photos on Facebook. So that's good. And certainly get people that sort of respond and retweet and that sort of thing. Do get some negative commentators. It's politics after all.
Right.
So it's definitely, you know, there's people who spend a lot of time on social media just to sort of target people who should have views opposite their own. Okay. But there's handy things like the mute function and other things to sort of help strain out the worst of that. And in other cases, you know, it's an opportunity to engage, and you know, you can turn things around and use it as an opportunity to get your message out.
So you've had some time to, you know, to get an idea of the environment. You know, you've met with people. What do you think from the community's point of view for the Edmonton-Centre? What are the top 5 challenges that you've seen that your constituents have wanted you to address?
Okay, yeah, top 5. Well, certainly, I think the downtown revitalization and growth is big for everybody. You know, people are really excited about the amount of new construction with the arena coming in, the number of new businesses that are opening downtown, the fact that more and more people are moving to the downtown core, that they're building the Valley Line from downtown to Mill Woods, all these things, it's expanding. So people are excited about that. Of course, there's also frustrations that come with that construction, that sort of thing. Of course, those are largely issues with the city, not with the province.
Right.
But out of that springs a few things. I know the local community leagues are very excited about the growth, but also very much wanting to see more growth of real community and certainly more families living within the downtown core.
Right.
So the challenges there are, of course, things like the fact that Alberta is the only jurisdiction in Canada that allows adult-only buildings. Okay. So we allow discrimination on the basis of age and housing. So that presents a barrier for some families that want to live in the downtown core. Other things like working with developers to try to get more 2- and 3-bedroom suites and sort of things that are amenable and open to families. Sure. So trying to change that narrative, the idea that downtown is a place you visit, but it's not a place you live, particularly if you have a family. Right. So working with groups on that, that's certainly been a thing. Other thing coming from the downtown development is the issue of housing homelessness and poverty. Right. Yeah. So with the arena coming in just next door here, that's to some extent going to have an impact on the lower income and homeless populations in downtown Edmonton. They're displaced. They need places to go, so they're ranging further and into other neighborhoods. So people are concerned, some for their own safety, but mostly people just want to see the issue addressed and see these people being getting help.
Right.
So, and that's been everyone from, the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, to the community leagues, to a lot of the community organizations I speak with, to just, when I go to seniors' homes,
Right.
Everybody's bringing it up and saying we need to deal with the homelessness and poverty issues here in Edmonton.
Yeah, if we take a look around this area, you mentioned Boyle Street Community Services being a major player. There's a number of the shelters that are in the area, the Herb Jameson, the Spady for, and they're part of the community, and that sense of disruption, I guess, is something that, at both levels of government, that is a major concern for communities. And if how do you deal best with the problem? I know we've got a number of initiatives that are ongoing that can help that, but yeah, so that sense of equity for the community as a whole.
Absolutely. So it's a major social issue, but it's also, interestingly, a major economic issue. It's much cheaper for the province and for the city to keep people housed and to provide people with the support services they need for people with addictions or mental health challenges. If we're providing those services and keeping them housed, then it's much cheaper. They're not having to access expensive services at the emergency rooms at hospitals. We're not having to pay police to be out in the streets acting as social workers, and we're not having to deal with a lot of the other costs that come with that. So it's both a compassionate social issue and it's an economic issue as we sort of think long term how we're going to deal with our finances as a province and as a city.
So with your experience to date, what are some of the challenges that you've found in terms of the learning curve for becoming an MLA and adapting to the requirements? What are some of the things that maybe the things that you didn't realize that were going to be part of that?
Right. Well, certainly one of the challenges is just the sheer amount of information and knowledge that comes at us. Especially in an area as diverse and as dynamic as Edmonton-Centre. There's a lot of different interests involved. So we've got a very active arts community. We've got all the social organizations. We've got sort of Edmonton City Hall and the municipal politics. We've got the business community, and then the various downtown community leagues, the issues, a lot of seniors, a lot of people low income, a lot of people with disabilities. So it gives so much stuff to have to sort of keep tabs on. And so one of the things I've definitely learned in that is the need to be able to delegate and to be able to work with other people. So certainly having some good staff at my constituency office is incredibly important.
Right.
I've got a fantastic caseworker who I believe actually also studied some at Grant MacEwan, who's able to handle a lot of the casework and the social agencies and those issues there. And it's also then I've had to learn how to specialize. So within a caucus of 54 MLAs, then we work together and we have to sit down and talk about, so what are the key issues that each of us are interested in, and then try to either work together on some things, share the load around a bit, because it's not possible to be an expert in everything.
Right.
But if you work together with other people, then you can sort of share skill sets, you can each focus on particular areas, share knowledge, and be able to support each other.
So you've kind of got the two roles. As within the constituency, you're the generalist, but in the government itself, you kind of have a specialization.
Yeah, exactly, somewhat, and that's been the other interesting challenge, is sort of learning how to balance both sides of that, right? Because of course we're all individual MLAs looking after our constituency in our area, and that's a whole job unto itself. Keeping in touch with everybody, keeping an eye on the issues, communicating both information from government to the community and from community to government. And then on the other side of that, of course, then we've got all the work that we do within our caucus and the work we do as legislators, which is a whole other side of things. Like you mentioned, the committees that I sit on, those can be quite a bit of work themselves as we're reviewing particular legislation, as we look over budget estimates from particular ministries as part of the budget process, and lots of other work there. So certainly a full plate.
So is there a typical day in the life of an MLA?
A typical day. I'd say somewhat. There's days in session and days when you're out of session. So typical day when we're in session, we'll have a morning session from 9 till noon. So that's just going to be debating different legislation and bills in the House. And then you have the afternoon session, which is where the daily routine happens. So that's, where, the speaker comes in, there's introductions of guests, we make member statements, minister statements, then we have question period, which of course is usually the most covered part of the day. And then after that, we go back into debating bills. And so that runs generally from 1:30 to 6.
Right.
So that's the general day in the legislature. But of course, in between that, then so over the lunch hour in the evenings, various organizations and groups that want to lobby or talk to MLAs and stuff, so have different events in and around the area around the legislature, so we're often attending those as well. Outside of the House, there's not really, it all varies, right? It's sort of, we decide how we're split time, but usually it consists of meeting with different community groups. Perhaps we're working with, meeting with ministers and stuff like that to try to advance things and get information for our constituents. And then, having opportunities to meet with constituents and attend community events.
Right. What would you call the most fulfilling aspects of the, your role? What makes you want to get up in the morning and, what really gives you that adrenaline rush in terms of knowing what you're doing is having a positive impact? Sure.
I'd say one of the best parts of the job is getting to go out and explore and find out about all the amazing work people are doing out in the community. Edmonton, Alberta, there are so many people who are incredibly passionate about a wide variety of issues. They're out there taking initiative, they're forming organizations, they're holding events, they're getting things done, they're fundraising, they're doing amazing volunteer work. I get to go around and talk with a lot of these people. I get to find out what they're doing, get to see all these great things that are being done, hear the stories, and it means so much to them. When I show up and go to an event, when an MLA is there, one of the things I keep hearing is, wow, I think this is the first time we've seen an MLA actually come and talk to us or come and see what we're doing. Because I think with so many new people elected, people are really excited to have the opportunity to be in this job and have the chance to engage the community. So that's one of the best parts of it for me. I think.
Okay. What other things have you been involved with? We talk about to our students about community engagement and things like that. What other kind of roles did you play? So you were involved with the bicycle commuters and.
Well, again, certainly being involved with the local music community is a real form of community engagement as well. Yeah. You get to know a lot of other people in the scene. You work together, to promote shows, to put things on, to try to build things up. Since I've been elected, I've been working with that as well. There's a group called the Edmonton Live Music Initiative that was started by another MacEwan graduate, a friend of mine, Tom Bennett, drummer, studio engineer. And again, that was just pulling together, all the musicians in Edmonton, all the venue owners, all the promoters, and sort of let's sit down and talk about what's important about our music scene. Yeah. What do we need to do to, make it better, and what are some of the things we can ask for from the municipal and provincial governments that are going to help us do that? So they're working with the city on licensing and zoning issues. Right. We're working provincially on AGLC regulations and other things that sort of affect how venues are able to operate. So, that's that sort of thing as well. It's really, I think a lot of it is about find what you're passionate about, find other people that are passionate about it, and see what you can do together.
Yeah. And if you take a look at, we're competing for tourist dollars. This is one area that we can differentiate ourselves in terms of that community, that arts community, attract people here, and it has a good economic case to it as well.
Absolutely, and it's a really exciting time, especially for me representing Edmonton downtown with the new MacEwan campus coming in here, bringing all the arts and music programs right into the heart of downtown Edmonton. There's a lot of great new live music venues opening in downtown core. Really excited next week for a place, the Needle Vinyl Tavern in the old CKUA building. Going to be a fantastic new live music venue. Yeah. So absolutely, it's another opportunity for us to brand ourselves as a city and work with a resource that we already have to try to attract more tourist dollars.
The other aspect is that you've been involved with business as well. That you were in the Northeast Business Association, or you were involved with them. So you have you were working with a business group that.
The North Edge Business Association is basically Avenue of Nations, 107th Avenue, and everything sort of on either side of that. So when I was working on my communications degree, I knew I wanted to get some experience, so I reached out and started volunteering with NEBA. At that time, the executive director was the wife of a friend of mine. Okay. When she moved on, then I sort of connected with the new executive director and started working with them again. So that was a great opportunity to get to know a lot of the local businesses in the area, sort of help set up their social media, help them do profiles that they were publishing online at the website, sort of the local businesses, help promote the work they were doing. Yeah.
So what type of challenges, when you were going through that, did you see in terms of their operations, and how were you able to be effective in terms of helping that?
Well, one of the big challenges, I think, for businesses in this area has traditionally been there's a little bit of public stigma. So people sort of look at the area and they go, oh, that's an area that's not safe, or it's not clean, it's not a great place to go. So it's about starting to change that perspective for people. So again, trying to personalize it more, introduce them to the fact that there's some fantastic businesses here, there's some really great places and unique places to visit and to go. And just, and help people sort of see that it's an area that's up and coming as well. It's an area that's revitalizing, it's growing, and where a lot of exciting things are happening.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of change in terms of the neighborhoods and things like that in our downtown community, and it just shows how vibrant that, we see that, we've had different groups that have come in that have opened up the businesses there, and then they've relocated, they've but this is kind of a lot of the real boiler room for a lot of our communities, this inner city kind of area.
Absolutely. So this whole area along 107th Ave is often the home for a lot of new Canadians who come to live in Edmonton. So they often get their start in these neighborhoods. And so that's true. For a lot of them, this is where they first live, and this is where they first open a business and first get their opportunity to start to really earn a living and build up their place here in Canada and be able to fend for themselves. So it's an area with a lot of great opportunity. I hope to see that continue, and I hope that, I guess, as things grow and we see more economic activity happen, then more of those businesses then will be motivated to stay even once they've grown.
Do you think that there are things that, knowing that we have business students here, that the small businesses in the area could use the skills of our students to help them in terms of marketing and those type of things?
Absolutely. That's something I've encouraged a lot of the community groups and a lot of other folks I've spoken with. There's a lot of arts groups, a lot of community organizations, who sort of come and talk to me and sort of say, okay, we've got ideas, we want to bring them forward, we're not quite sure how to approach this. I've often encouraged them to tap into the resources here in MacEwan, whether that be the communications program, the students there who are looking for opportunities or experience, or business and marketing as well, who can help people with some of that skill set.
So we have a question here from one of our students.
Sure.
You said that repetition is a main way of communication. However, in my experience, people just find it annoying and tend to listen or understand less. What do you do in those situations?
It's a fine balance, right? So absolutely. Too much repetition and you turn people off. They get frustrated, they get angry, they just don't want to hear it anymore. So it's about finding the proper balance. There's sort of a threshold, and if you find the right balance where, you're going to annoy a few people over here, but you're going to get the penetration you need with the larger public over there. So you see that in advertising. That's why people run commercials, and they'll run them repeatedly, and they may have a really annoying jingle or theme song or catchphrase, but you remember it.
Right.
So, but it is a balance, particularly in something like politics, where it's about being personable, and I want people to like me as an individual. So part of it is about being creative in your repetition as well. So coming from a communications background, I always try to never say the same thing the same way twice, but I'll give the same message.
Yeah.
So may reorganize it a little bit, repackage it, how I put it forward, especially in social media, sort of learn those tricks as well.
Yeah.
But it's about that, it's really about the core message and, that you're repeating, though you can find different ways to shape it.
We were talking a little bit earlier about the primaries in the U.S., so maybe could you comment on what you're seeing down there in terms of effective use of communication?
That's an interesting case, and this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, in politics, and it can be a challenge in business too. And I'm trying to remember the exact phrase that I'm thinking of here. Basically, what it comes down to is that the amount of effort it requires to take apart a lie is much larger than the amount of effort it takes to spread the lie in the first place.
Okay.
So that's one of the biggest challenges you face. It's really easy to say something that's not true and not factual but sounds convincing.
So that'll stick.
And that'll stick.
Yeah.
And the amount of work that it takes to take that idea apart and explain to people why that's not true, why that's not actually a fact, and how things actually work.
Right.
It's a lot harder, and it doesn't fit in the space of a single tweet.
Exactly.
So, we see that in the U.S. right now, of course, with Donald Trump. who's very good at making extremely disingenuous statements, you know, things that are not even remotely factually based,
Right.
but sound convincing to a certain group of people that he wants to reach out to. And for the people that want to try to debunk that, then it takes a lot more work to do it. So it's a challenge of being in politics, and it can be a challenge of being in business too. Whether you're dealing with a competitor, whether you're dealing with, you know, a particular bad narrative that may have gotten out about your business, that sort of thing. And in a lot of cases, I find what works most effectively then is if you've built up a brand of personal trust.
Right.
So if I've already established myself as credible in the community, I've already established myself as a trustworthy brand, as someone who's personable and approachable, then even if these sorts of smears come at me, then you know, people are less inclined to believe them and more inclined to listen to me when I try to take them apart.
Right. So it's your own kind of your values that you're seeing, not only in terms of what you're saying, but how you're comporting yourself in terms of following through with what you're saying you're going to do. You talked about delegation, but accountability as well, in terms of ensuring that, you know, if you say you're going to do something, that ultimately you're going to be responsible for that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not just enough to sort of show up for the photo ops, have to actually do the groundwork and follow through after.
Right. It's been a great opportunity to have you share some of your background, your history, and some of the challenges and your wins in terms of your MLA career up to date, and from MacEwan University. And next up, thank you for coming out.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.